The first thing she said that morning was a joke that didn't sound like a joke at all. "My sister's prettier." Marwa laughed softly, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear as sunlight spilled across the small cafe table between them. The words floated lightly into the air, almost playful, almost careless. But something about the way her eyes flickered down afterward made it feel heavier, like a truth she had been carrying for years. And before the silence could swallow the moment whole, the man sitting across from her, tired eyes, gentle hands, and a quiet strength that came from raising a child alone, looked up and said something that would change everything. I was never looking at her. That was the moment the world shifted, though neither of them fully understood it yet. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet moments that change lives forever, take a second right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel Home with Dad. You never know who might need a story like this today. The cafe was small, tucked between a bookstore and a faded tailor shop on a sunlit street that seemed to hum with ordinary life. The smell of fresh bread and strong tea filled the air, and outside children ran past in bursts of laughter, their shadows dancing across the pavement. It was the kind of place where people came to forget their worries for an hour, though Marwa had never quite managed that. Not completely. She had always lived in the shadow of her younger sister, Hira, whose beauty seemed effortless and undeniable. Where Hira walked into a room and turned heads without trying, Marwa felt like she had to shrink herself just to fit into the spaces left behind. It wasn't that she wasn't beautiful, she was in a quiet, understated way, but the world had a habit of overlooking subtle things. And over time, those small moments of being overlooked turned into a belief she couldn't shake. She learned to laugh it off, to joke about it, to say things like, "My sister's prettier," before anyone else could think it. It was easier that way. Safer. Across from her sat Ayan, a man who looked older than he probably was, though not because of age, because of life. His son Sammy was at school just down the road, and Ayan had carved out this small hour for himself before returning to the responsibilities that defined his everyday. He had been a single father for 5 years now, ever since a loss that he rarely spoke about. People in the neighborhood respected him quietly, the way you respect someone who carries more than they let on. Marwa had met him by accident a few weeks earlier when Sammy had dropped his school notebook near the cafe entrance. She had picked it up and chased after the boy, only to find herself face to face with a man whose tired smile felt strangely familiar, as if she had known him long before that moment. Their conversation started small, a greeting here, a shared table there, then one morning turned into many. And somehow, without either of them noticing exactly when it happened, they had become a part of each other's routine. But Marwa never thought she was the one he noticed, because Hira had come by the cafe once, just once, and that was enough. The way people looked at Hira, the way even the light seemed to favor her, it was impossible not to compare. Marwa had seen Ayan glance up when Hira walked in that day, just for a second. That was all it took for her old belief to settle back in place, firm and unshakable. So when she said those words, "My sister's prettier," it was half a joke and half a shield. She didn't expect his answer. "I was never looking at her." The words lingered between them, soft but certain. Marwa blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. There was no teasing in his voice, no hesitation. Just a quiet honesty that felt almost too direct. For a moment she didn't know what to say. The world outside continued as usual, the clatter of cups, the hum of conversation, the distant laughter of children. But inside that small space, everything felt still. Marwa forced a smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. She tried to brush it off, to turn it back into a joke, but something in her chest had already begun to shift. It was subtle, like the first crack in a wall that had stood for years. "You're just being kind," she said lightly. But Ayan shook his head, his gaze steady. "No," he replied just as softly. "I'm being honest." And for reasons she couldn't explain, that honesty scared her more than anything else. Because if he was telling the truth, then everything she believed about herself might not be. The days that followed were different. though nothing outwardly changed. The cafe was still the same. The sunlight still filtered through the windows in the same gentle way, and Sammy still ran into his father's arms every afternoon with stories from school. But inside Marwa, something had begun to unravel. She found herself replaying that moment over and over again. The way he had said it, the certainty in his voice, the absence of doubt. No one had ever spoken about her like that before. It wasn't that she hadn't received compliments. She had, but they were always polite, always surface level. This felt different. It felt like he had seen something deeper, and, more importantly, that he had meant it. She didn't know how to handle that, so she did what she always did when things felt too real. She pulled back. She started coming to the cafe a little later, timing her visits so they wouldn't overlap. As often, when they did cross paths, she kept the conversations short, careful not to linger too long. It wasn't intentional, not entirely. It was instinct, because believing him would mean letting go of a story she had told herself for years. And that was harder than it should have been, Ayan noticed. He didn't say anything at first. He wasn't the kind of man who forced conversations or demanded explanations. Life had taught him patience, and more importantly, it had taught him how to read the things people didn't say. He saw the way Marwa's laughter became more guarded, the way her eyes avoided his when their hands brushed while passing a cup of tea, the way she seemed to shrink into herself again, as if she were retreating to a place he couldn't reach. It reminded him of someone he had known once. Someone who had also carried quiet doubts, like invisible weight, and he understood, so instead of pushing, he waited. One afternoon, as the sun hung high in the sky and the air shimmered with warmth, Marwa found herself sitting on a bench near the school, watching as children poured out through the gates. She wasn't sure why she had come there. Maybe she needed the noise, the movement, something to distract her from the thoughts that refused to settle. Sammy spotted her first. His face lit up with the kind of joy only a child could carry so freely, and he ran toward her without hesitation. Marwa couldn't help but smile as he threw his arms around her, his small hands gripping tightly as if he had known her forever. "Baba talks about you," he said suddenly, his voice bright and unfiltered. "Marwa's heart skipped, oh?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Sammy nodded enthusiastically. "He says you're kind," he continued, "and that you listen." It was such a simple statement, so innocent, but it hit her in a way she hadn't expected. Kind. Someone who listens. Not less pretty, not the other one, just her. Before she could respond, Ayan approached, his steps steady but unhurried. He greeted her with a small nod, his expression softening as he saw the way Sammy clung to her side. For a moment, the three of them stood there, framed by the golden light of the afternoon, and something about it felt almost like a glimpse into a life that could exist, if only she let it. That evening, Marwa sat by her window, watching the sky fade into shades of orange and pink. The city quieted slowly, the noise of the day giving way to a softer, more reflective stillness. She thought about everything, about the years she had spent comparing herself to her sister, about the ways she had learned to make herself smaller, quieter, less noticeable, about the way Ayan looked at her, not with pity, not with politeness, but with something real, and for the first time in a long time, she asked herself a question she had been avoiding. What if she was wrong? What if she had been wrong all along? The thought was both terrifying and freeing, because if she was wrong, then maybe she didn't have to carry that weight anymore. Maybe she didn't have to be the girl who joked about being second best. Maybe she could be something more. The next morning, she returned to the cafe earlier than usual. Ayan was already there, sitting at their usual table, a cup of tea untouched in front of him. He looked up as she entered, surprise flickering across his face before settling into a quiet warmth. Marwa hesitated for a second, then walked over. This time, she didn't sit across from him. She sat beside him. The silence between them was different. Now, not heavy, not uncertain, but full of things that didn't need to be said out loud. After a moment, she spoke. "You meant it, didn't you?" she asked softly, Ayan turned to her, his expression steady. I don't say things I don't mean, he replied. Marwa nodded, her gaze dropping to her hands. I don't know how to believe you, she admitted. There it was, the truth laid bare. Ayan didn't rush to answer. He didn't offer empty reassurances or quick fixes. Instead, he did something much simpler and much more powerful. He stayed. I'm not asking you to believe me right away, he said gently. Just don't decide I'm wrong before you give it a chance. It wasn't a grand declaration. It wasn't dramatic or overwhelming, but it was enough, because sometimes change doesn't come in loud, life-altering moments. Sometimes it comes quietly, in a sentence, in a look, in the way someone chooses to stay when it would be easier to walk away. And in that quiet, sunlit cafe,